I can't believe how quickly life can change. Just a couple of weeks ago, I thought my only worry was a small lie I'd told my boyfriend Alex about my body count. Now everything has spiraled into chaos. Hurtful names, threats, protective orders. I keep wondering how it all fell apart so fast, and if there was a moment I could have turned it around. But I guess there's no point in dwelling on that now. Let me back up and explain how we got here. I met Alex 3 years ago, during one of those moments when you're not looking for anything serious, and then boom, someone extraordinary walks into your life. Our connection felt instant. We laughed at the same silly shows, shared an obsession for trying new foods, and just naturally clicked. I'd had my fair share of mediocre or downright toxic relationships before, so being with him felt like a breath of fresh air. It was the kind of romance where you start picturing a future together without even meaning to. Eventually, we got comfortable enough to talk about personal things, family stories, weird childhood habits, big dreams. Somewhere along the line, the subject of sexual history came up. I'd heard from mutual friends that Alex was a bit old-fashioned when it came to that topic. I worried my number might bother him. The truth is, I've only slept with 5 people in my entire life, including Alex. But in the heat of the moment, panic got the better of me. I recalled a conversation we had right before he asked about my number. He was telling me how disappointed he felt in his sister after she casually mentioned her body count was 6. He'd literally joked, "Yours better not be that high." The way he said it, with that half-joking, half-serious tone, made my anxiety spike. So, when he asked me outright, I lied. I told him my number was 3. I convinced myself that one little fib couldn't hurt. He'll never know, I thought, and it'll spare me the judgment. Looking back, it was a terrible choice, but at the time, I just couldn't handle the risk of him thinking less of me. Fast forward to a few days ago, we were out to dinner with some friends, and the topic of body counts arose again in casual conversation. My stomach dropped. I could feel my face getting hot, my hands starting to tremble under the table. As the conversation went on, the guilt gnawed at me. By the time we got home, I knew I had to come clean. I confessed to Alex that I'd lied about my number, that it was actually 5, not 3. I braced myself for his reaction, but I still wasn't prepared for how hard he took it. He looked genuinely hurt, betrayed. I tried to explain my reason, that I was scared he'd judge me, especially since he'd made that comment about his sister. But all he could focus on was the fact that I'd lied. He started calling me names, lying bitch, stuff like that. It stung, but I also understood his anger, at least at first. I knew lying wasn't right. I felt terrible, and I told him so. But no matter how many times I apologized, I couldn't seem to reach him. He shut down, said he needed space, and barely spoke to me for the next day or two. That was painful enough. I blamed myself for shattering his trust. But soon, I realized my so-called lie wasn't the only issue. He told me, point blank, that he was disgusted I'd slept with 5 guys in total. He said 4 was his limit. I stared at him, dumbfounded, especially because his own number was bigger than mine. I never asked for it, but he volunteered it once, and it was definitely more than 5. I couldn't wrap my head around why it was okay for him to have a higher count, but not me. I tried to address his contradictory stance, but he just shrugged it off or repeated that he hated liars and loose women. And then, in the same breath, he'd try to assure me he cared about me. It was confusing. The more I thought about it, the more I remembered past incidents when he'd make pointed comments about my appearance, often framed as a compliment with a nasty edge. Like telling me I'm beautiful but that my shirt makes me look fat, or saying he loves my eyes but only if I'm wearing mascara. These comments had become so normal to me that I didn't see them as red flags at first. I grew up with parents who belittled me, so I'd learned to brush off insults as no big deal. But in hindsight, that kind of behavior is far from normal or healthy. Once we started fighting about my number, those hurtful remarks escalated. Every day, a new insult. Sometimes I'd cry, sometimes I'd shut down. He also has a habit of stonewalling me, just ignoring me completely if I do something he doesn't like. In the past, I tolerated it because I wanted to keep the peace, but it all added up to a growing sense of unease. A week later, we had another serious talk. I tried to apologize once more for lying about my body count and asked him outright if one extra partner was worth destroying our relationship over. He said yes, it was a deal breaker. The conversation ended with him calling me a used whore and marching out of the house to stay with his mum. I was stunned. I felt dizzy, like I was in a nightmare that refused to end. Not long after, he texted me saying he wanted to come by to pick up some of his things. I dreaded seeing him. When he finally showed up, it was a complete roller coaster. He was crying, begging me to forgive him for calling me horrible names, presenting me with flowers, chocolates, and even a bottle of my favorite wine. My head was spinning. One minute he's telling me I'm worthless, the next he's showering me with affection. I told him I needed time to think. Immediately he got sullen and started stonewalling me again. He refused to leave. I had to call a friend over for backup because I felt uncomfortable being alone with him. When my friend arrived, he tried to push past her and get further into the house, but she pulled him back by his hood and told him to leave, or she'd call the police. He finally backed off, but before he left, he glared at me and said, "I saw your post." That scared me more than anything. I do have social media, but I barely post, especially not about relationship drama. So for him to say that, I knew he must have stumbled upon something, maybe an online forum or a subreddit where I'd been venting. That realization made me feel violated, like he was stalking my online presence. My friend locked the door behind him, and I just burst into tears from the stress. I'd planned on taking legal steps if his behavior escalated further, but work obligations delayed me for a few days. Meanwhile, he started bombarding me with messages from random accounts, calling me a cunt for posting about our issues, complaining that strangers on the internet were painting him as a monster. I refused to respond, which only seemed to enrage him more. Then, out of nowhere, he switched tactics. One set of messages claimed he loved me too much to let me go. Another set, later that same day, contained pictures of him in bed with a new woman. He wrote something like, "She's perfect, she's pure, unlike you." I felt physically ill. The hypocrisy of him calling me a used whore for having 5 partners while he was casually sleeping with someone else to prove he'd moved on was mind-boggling. I decided enough was enough. I left work early one day to file for a protective order, but during my lunch break at a nearby cafe, Alex showed up. He was screaming, calling me lucky that he even wanted me, accusing me of cheating on him. I threatened to call the police and he laughed, saying they wouldn't do shit for a whore. So I did call them, and he left before they arrived. Fortunately, there were witnesses who confirmed his aggressive behavior, so the police took me seriously. They even drove me back to work so I wouldn't have to walk alone. I filed for a temporary protective order that afternoon and was granted an ex parte emergency order until an official hearing date. Part of me still feels guilty, like I blew this whole thing out of proportion. But then I remember the names he called me, the threats, the way he refused to leave my house, how he's showing up unannounced and screaming at me in public. No one should have to live with that fear. I'm currently staying with the same friend who helped me kick him out. She's been a lifesaver, someone to talk to when I'm racked with anxiety, and who reminds me that it isn't my fault he turned out this way. I keep replaying our earlier days in my mind, trying to reconcile the sweet, funny boyfriend with this angry, spiteful person who hurls insults at me for something so minor. I know lying about my body count was wrong, but it doesn't justify abuse. I wish I could say I feel relief now that I've decided to end the relationship for good, but I'm mostly sad, numb, and a bit scared. My friend arranged for someone to change the locks at my apartment, and she's picking up more of my stuff while I wait out this storm. I haven't heard from Alex in a few days. which is a blessing, but also leaves me on edge, constantly checking over my shoulder. If I learned one thing, it's that I need to break my habit of people-pleasing at the expense of my own well-being. I grew up in a household where name-calling was normal, so I didn't immediately realize how messed up it is for a partner to degrade you. Now I see that such behavior is a flashing red sign that something's not right. The protective order hearing is coming up, and I'm hoping it'll put a legal barrier between us. I'm prepared for the possibility that he'll lash out again if the judge grants the order. My friend keeps encouraging me to document everything, including screenshots of his messages and pictures of him showing up at my place. It feels surreal to be living out something that sounds like a dramatic, cautionary tale, all triggered by one anxious lie and a man who wanted to control me in ways I didn't see at first. I wish I had a neat resolution, a moral of the story, or a hopeful note. Honestly, I'm just glad to be safe at the moment. I'm coming to terms with the fact that sometimes, no matter how well a relationship starts, cracks can appear that you never thought possible. And if you've been raised to accept name-calling, you might ignore the cracks until they become huge, gaping holes. My biggest regret is the lie, obviously. But at the same time, lying about a body count shouldn't lead to this level of rage and disrespect. That's on him, not me. If he can't handle someone who's had 5 past partners, that's his problem. If he wants to manipulate and degrade me for it, then he's not the man I thought he was. So here I am, stuck in a mess of protective orders, changed locks, random hateful messages, and lingering paranoia. But I'm determined to move forward. Once this legal stuff is resolved, I'm going to refocus on myself. Therapy, maybe some healing time alone. I don't want to see any more red flags too late. I want to value myself enough to walk away at the first sign of disrespect. For anyone who's followed along or who might be facing something similar, I guess my main takeaway is trust your gut. One small lie might open your eyes to a partner's darker side, or it might not. But if it does, believe what you see. If they call you vile names and threaten you, that's emotional abuse. No one deserves that. Protect yourself, even when it feels terrifying or complicated. And remember, we can't please everyone by minimizing our own boundaries or ignoring our own safety. I don't know what happens next. For now, I'm focusing on staying safe and looking out for me. That's all I can do, and maybe that's enough for the moment.